It had been 6 long, agonizing months in the hospital. 6 months where every day felt like a battle as I tried to rebuild the strength my body had lost. My muscles had weakened significantly, and all I could think about was returning home to a quiet, peaceful environment where I could heal, both physically and mentally. But when the day finally came, what awaited me was far from peaceful. When Chris and I stepped through the front door, we froze. Everywhere we looked, the house was filled with clutter. Boxes, furniture, clothes, piled high in every corner. It was overwhelming. The clutter wasn't ours. It belonged to Sharon, my mother-in-law, and Dolly, Chris's sister. I stood there, shocked and confused. "What happened here?" I asked Chris, my voice barely above a whisper. "This wasn't here before." Chris shook his head, equally confused. "Their things were supposed to be out by now. They promised it would all be gone before you came home." Suddenly, Sharon appeared, a smug smile on her face. "Oh, we've moved in," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "We had no choice. The family home is being repaired, and we needed a place to stay." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was our home, mine and Chris's. "But you said it was temporary," I protested, my heart pounding in my chest. "You were supposed to be out by the time I got discharged." Sharon waved her hand dismissively. "Well, things changed. We're here now. If you don't like it, maybe you should leave." Leave? From my own home? I glanced at Chris, searching his face for some sign that this wasn't happening, but all I saw was frustration. He was just as upset as I was, though Sharon clearly didn't care, and standing right beside her was Dolly, grinning as if she found the whole situation amusing. I felt my stomach churn as the reality of the situation hit me. They had no intention of leaving. This was no longer just an inconvenience, it was an invasion. Their laughter echoed through the house, mocking my shock and disbelief. That night, as Chris and I sat in silence, the weight of what had happened settled over us like a dark cloud. I could see the anger in his eyes, but we both knew this wasn't just about the clutter. It was about everything Sharon and Dolly had done over the years. Years of manipulation, selfishness, and entitlement. This was just the final straw. "Let's leave," Chris finally said, his voice low but resolute. "We don't have to put up with this anymore." I nodded, my heart heavy but my mind clear. We had a plan to reclaim our lives, and now it was time to put it into action. To truly understand how we got here, you need to know more about Sharon and Dolly. I married Chris when I was 30, and at first everything seemed perfect. We were both working good jobs, and we were happy. But from the very beginning, my interactions with Sharon and Dolly were strained. Sharon, my mother-in-law, was the type of woman who believed the world owed her something. She constantly complained about her health, back pain, she said, and used it as an excuse to get people to do things for her. And Dolly, her daughter, was no better. Divorced, bitter, and living back home with Sharon, Dolly spent her days gambling, drinking, and making everyone around her miserable. After Chris and I got married, my maternal uncle offered us his house to live in. He was elderly, with no children of his own, and had moved into a care facility. It seemed like a perfect solution, an old house, but with plenty of space for us to start our lives together. There was only one problem. The house was just a 30-minute drive from Sharon and Dolly's. At first, I thought it was natural to visit Chris's family on the weekends. It felt like something you did as newlyweds. Spend time with family, build connections. But I quickly realized that Sharon didn't see it that way. To her, I wasn't just family. I was her personal chauffeur, her errand girl, and her ATM all rolled into one. "Anita, I need to go to the store. Can you take me? My back's acting up again," Sharon would say, always with that same whiny tone. At first, I went along with it, thinking it was just part of being a daughter-in-law. But the demands kept coming. Every weekend it was something new, driving her to the store, paying for her groceries because she conveniently forgot her wallet, taking her to the doctor because she was too weak to go alone. It didn't take long for me to realize that Sharon wasn't just asking for help, she was using me. Whenever I tried to push back, she played the victim. "You're my daughter-in-law," she'd say, her voice dripping with self-pity. "Isn't it your job to take care of me?" And then there was Dolly, Sharon's partner in crime. Dolly had moved back in with Sharon after her divorce, and she was a wreck. She spent her nights at the bar, getting drunk and causing trouble. More than once, Sharon called me in the middle of the night, asking me to pick Dolly up after she'd gotten herself thrown out of some dive bar. "Anita, Dolly's at it again," Sharon would say, her voice trembling. "Can you please go get her?" Reluctantly, I'd go, always finding Dolly in some state of chaos, either fighting with the bar staff or passed out in a corner. It was humiliating, not just for her, but for me, and it didn't stop there. Dolly had a nasty habit of blaming everyone else for her problems, and I often found myself in the crossfire. One night, after yet another rescue mission, Dolly looked at me with bloodshot eyes and slurred, "This is your fault, you know. If you hadn't married Chris, none of this would have happened." I wanted to scream. How could someone so selfish, so blind to their own actions, put the blame on me? But I didn't. I kept quiet, swallowing the anger and frustration, hoping that one day things would get better. But they didn't. As time went on, the weight of Sharon and Dolly's demands grew heavier. It wasn't just the errands or the middle-of-the-night rescues. It was the constant stress, the manipulation, the feeling that I was never good enough for them. And my body began to break under the pressure. I remember the day it all came crashing down. It was a Friday evening, and I had just finished another exhausting week at work. I was sitting at home with Chris, finally feeling like I could relax when a sudden dizziness hit me. The room spun, and before I knew it, I was on the floor, clutching my head in agony. "Anita!" Chris's voice was filled with panic as he knelt beside me. "What's wrong? What's happening?" I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. My mouth felt heavy, my tongue thick. Something was terribly wrong. Chris wasted no time. He called an ambulance, and within minutes I was being rushed to the hospital. The doctors ran test after test, and finally they delivered the news. I had suffered a stroke. I was 31 years old, and I had just had a stroke. The doctors couldn't explain it. I didn't smoke, I didn't drink excessively, and I didn't have any of the usual risk factors. But deep down, I knew what had caused it: the constant stress, the never-ending demands, the feeling of being trapped in a life I hadn't signed up for. Sharon and Dolly had pushed me to my breaking point, and my body had paid the price. The next 6 months were a blur of hospital stays, physical therapy, and recovery. My body slowly began to heal, but my mind was a different story. I was haunted by the thought that, at any moment, it could all happen again. And worst of all, Sharon and Dolly showed no signs of remorse. Despite Chris's insistence that they stay away, they showed up at the hospital, uninvited and unannounced. Sharon, ever the victim, had the nerve to complain that she needed me back home. "When are you coming home, Anita?" she asked one day, as if I were on some sort of vacation. "We're struggling without you." I could barely contain my anger. Here I was, fighting for my life, and all she cared about was how I could serve her. By the time I was finally discharged from the hospital, I had made up my mind. Things were going to change. No more running errands, no more middle-of-the-night rescues, no more being used. But when Chris and I walked into our home and saw the mountain of Sharon and Dolly's belongings, it became clear that they had no intention of letting us live in peace. Sharon's voice rang in my ears as I stood there, stunned. "This is our house now. If you don't like it, you can leave." The laughter that followed felt like a dagger to the heart. How could they be so heartless? How could they take everything from us and still demand more? But that night, as Chris and I sat together in silence, the anger that had been building inside me for years finally reached its breaking point. "We're leaving," I said, my voice firm and unwavering. "I can't do this anymore." Chris nodded. "We've talked about this long enough. It's time." We had been planning our escape for months, ever since Sharon and Dolly had forced their way into our lives and our home. And now, with them out of the house on one of their many refreshing trips, we saw our chance. The day Sharon and Dolly left for their trip, Chris and I sprang into action. We packed up our most important belongings, called a real estate agent, and listed the house for sale. It was drastic, yes, but it was the only way to rid ourselves of their toxic presence once and for all. A month later, while Sharon and Dolly were still on their trip, Dolly called me, her voice filled with confusion and anger. "Anita, what's going on? We can't get into the house. Where are our things?" I took a deep breath before responding. "I forgot to mention. We sold the house." "What? You sold it?" Dolly screamed. "How could you do this without telling us?" "This house was ours, Dolly. Not yours. You forced your way in, and now you're dealing with the consequences." Sharon and Dolly were furious, of course, but there was nothing they could do. The house had been sold, their belongings were in storage, and Chris and I were free. For the first time in years, we were free. The final confrontation came when we met them at a small cafe. They demanded to know where their things were, but we stood our ground. "We'll tell you where your belongings are," I said, "but only if you agree to never contact us again. No more money, no more favors, no more demands." They protested, of course, but Chris's firm refusal to give in made it clear that this time, things were different. We were different. In the end, they had no choice. They agreed to our terms, and Chris and I walked away, finally free of the burden that had weighed us down for so long. Since that day, life has been different, peaceful, happy, and free from the chaos that Sharon and Dolly once brought into our lives. Chris and I are expecting our first child, a little girl, and I can't wait to raise her in a world where she will never have to endure the kind of manipulation and cruelty that Sharon and Dolly inflicted on us. As I sit here, feeling my baby kick inside me, I think back on everything we've been through. It was hard, unbearably hard at times, but we made it through. And now, we have a future to look forward to, a future where we can live our lives on our own terms. Because in the end, no one, no matter how toxic, has the right to take away your peace. And Chris and I, we fought for ours, and we won.